Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about A Murder at the End of the World, Season 1, Episode 6. It's called Chapter 6, Crime Scene. Two separate words there. Spoilers for the episode, of course, before I get into anything. This episode obviously ties back up with what we saw in Episode 1 with the flashbacks. It kind of brings that backstory full circle. And that's a good half of the episode, and then the other half is very much the story of what happened with Lee and her marriage and why she has the wig and the passport and all those things. And the episode largely boils down to those two things. Like that takes up the vast majority of the runtime. We had the cliffhanger last time with Darby being trapped in the pool with the cover coming over, and seemingly Lee gets David to help smash it to get her out, and Darby is recuperating at the start of the episode. But Darby doesn't trust Lee based on what she found last episode and speculates that she's even the one who tried to kill her. And Lee goes into the story about how Andy has been as a husband, as a father, and this story of how she tried to escape him, which is tough because he is this, he's this big shot. She says he literally has the president's phone number. So she tried to do this whole thing where she basically slipped into a different identity and tried to flee the country with her son. But somehow Andy was there, waiting at her friend's place in Canada, and she doesn't know how that happened. So I think what's interesting to me about all this stuff, one, I think the story is very well done. I mean, I think one of the big things about the OA and this show is that the show is very good when characters are telling stories in the show, and the way that they make the stories feel important by their narration telling the story, mixed with the way it's edited and the music and all that. It's a very good kind of build to the inevitable conclusion, which is she's not going to succeed, right? We know she's going to fail because she's still here. But I think it's interesting that we present Andy as this violent man. We got a glimpse of his temper in a previous episode, and here we see that he's so obsessed with his son and keeping him coddled and in a bubble and perfect that he lashes out if anything happens to him. We see him hit Lee. And I think what stuck out to me about that is a couple things. One, the entire flashback story of this show is about a serial killer that started with murdering his own wife. That felt like thematically we're tying those two things together in some way. That Andy conceivably could be a new killer in that sense. He might already be a new killer. But this idea that he hits her in front of their son, and there's this moment where they both acknowledge and look at their son, and they can see that their son has seen this. The son goes and hugs her and is concerned for her, and Andy kind of stands there. I won't say he necessarily feels guilty in the moment, but he's definitely aware that his son has just witnessed this act, and as is Lee. And Lee even brings up when she's talking to Darby about how Zoomer's at an age where he's learning things, that the behavior he's seeing could influence the behavior that he has when he grows up. So I do think this is very much tying into the type of scenarios and surroundings and upbringings that can lead to someone being a killer. And I think that's kind of baked in there to this story as well. Darby also talks to Lee about how Lee feels guilty that she did something wrong by falling for this man, for being in this predicament. And Darby points out, no, you were doxxed, you were harassed, so you basically ran to someone you thought could save you, but it turns out he's basically just that personified into one person. He's this controlling person who's keeping an eye on her 24/7, all that stuff. So all of this was really invigorating to watch. I think even the first half of this episode, I was feeling really good about the mystery in a way that I hadn't in previous couple of episodes, where I loved the character stuff and the themes, but I think this episode made the actual story exciting again, and I was really into what we were learning about Andy and Lee. Obviously, Andy feels the prime suspect now. He maybe has a motive. Some of the things we learn here is that Darby seems to have been invited by Andy as the bait so that Bill would come, because Bill would hope to see her. because he initially turned him down. They're not entirely sure as of yet, but the speculation might be that he wanted Bill there to maybe kill him or to maybe do something else. They also theorize that maybe he's too smart to just like invite him to his own place and then kill him there, because that would, even for someone of his stature, that's a bit suspicious and on the nose. But certainly feels like he has a lot of motive here. I mean, maybe the idea of wiping out the paternal father, the biological father, would be something he would want to do, given how controlling he is about everything his son encounters, and like how he's, because she describes that he measures what he eats to the gram. Like he's that controlling. He's OCD about everything his son is and does. So that's interesting, and it sounds like Bill was going to help Lee with Rohan. Rohan is his boat, and the whole plan seemingly was to have Lee escape with her son from Andy. That's what everything was going to be building up to. And someone seemingly has killed Bill. Kill Bill. I've said that a few times as I've been reviewing this, and I've become very aware, because I really like the movie Kill Bill, and it's just funny to me that I keep saying Kill Bill in various forms throughout the discussion of this. So that all was put to a stop, right? So Bill's been killed, Rohan's been killed, so it seems like someone really doesn't want her to leave her husband, and obviously the prime suspect to that would be the husband. Now, the one big thing here is that it feels like, because it's a show that's had reveals and it's had twists, and because there's one episode left, it does feel like maybe there will be another twist, but I'm sort of like saying that from a meta perspective rather than because there's anything in the episode itself that made me doubt this information. But there could be another wrinkle. There could be another person behind it. They theorize that Lumet helped Andy with all this. Maybe she's helping him with the surveillance, and she's like the one with the hacking experience that's helping him. These are very much possibilities, but interesting. We actually get more of Oliver this episode, a bit more than we've had up until this point. He ends up coming to give a message to Darby and Lee, and they're scared because they think it might be the killer or Andy coming in, and they sort of prep for defense. And he comes in and he's walking around. He's, because he mentioned before, of course, that he could walk a little bit, but not for very long. And we see that, and it does make him look rather vulnerable. It looks like it's not easy for him. It looks like he struggles when he's trying. And it almost makes his information feel more genuine because he's presenting himself at his most sort of vulnerable. And that was like a choice they wanted the character to consciously make, or the creators of the show made it so that we, the audience, would take his information as genuine, which is that he's here to help. He's here because David asked him to come hide them. And when he requests that he goes with them to Bill's room because Darby wants to study the crime scene again, it does feel genuine. Like, part of me later on when he was asking questions was thinking, oh, is there something suspicious about this? Is Oliver up to something? Is he spying on behalf of someone else? That's very much a possibility. But he was doing a very good job of feeling genuine in the way that he was showing concern or trying to help, or the idea that he's scared that he could be next as a victim. I thought all that stuff felt really good in the moment, and I think the actor did a really good job with it. The music helped as well, I would say. But yeah, so Darby's realizing that she's been focusing so much on who the killer is that she has to understand more about the victim. So they want to go back to the crime scene, and they look around. There's a couple of nice little character moments here where she sniffs the jumper, and she has a little flashback of Bill. Again, it's those little human moments that really, I think, help this show a lot. Basically get to the point where they realize that what he reached for, the thing that's covered in blood as he was dying, was a copy of her book. And Lee and Oliver suggest that he must have wanted Darby to see something in the book. There must be something around this chapter that he seemed to be trying to get to, which is the last chapter, which is picking up where she was reading the book from in episode 1. That will be a hint. Something, he was trying to give her a clue, effectively. So this is where she reads the rest of the book, right? We go back to, and I think this is actually a really great storytelling technique. Obviously, from episodes 2 through 5, we've been getting these flashbacks that build up from the start of the book up until where we left off in episode 1. But I think it's really special that we started the whole flashbacks with her narrating part of it, with, let's say narrating, with her actually reading the book, right? She was actively doing that in episode 1, and she stopped when it became too emotional to go any further. She clearly doesn't like going past that. She says in this scene that she's never read that final chapter to the end since she wrote it, right? She never wanted to. It was too much for her. So the idea that we come back to this and she has to manually read the where she left off from, she has to continue from that point, I think is a beautiful narrative little touch. So it makes you feel like a big deal that we're back to this point. We're not just there because the flashbacks have gotten to that point again. We're also having the character actively participate in reliving the memory. Very good stuff. So we see what happened. We get a little bit of a repeat of some of the moments, of course, but we get what happened when the killer came in and they were in the basement. And after a moment of tension, he shoots himself, right? The jig is up, as you say. As they're saying all the victims' names, and he kills himself. Of course, we did see in the first episode that Bill did step in front of Darby. That was something we already saw, but it was touching to see it again. And he's in shock. Like, the blood spatter hits his face, and he's in shock. And Darby kind of has to snap him out of it to get him to help, like, move some of the appliances. I think it's like the dish, the washer or the dryer or whatever, over to the base of the stairs to go up. Actually, a little touch here that I thought was interesting as well, that I think really goes nicely with Darby's character, and this was in episode 1 as well, but I was thinking, because this is the thing, when you see something a second time, you sort of analyze it a bit more. And when I was watching this scene this time, when they're dismantling the stairs, it occurred to me, and this ties in with sort of Bill and Darby's relationship a little bit as well, the idea that Darby's so driven by the pursuit and she's obsessed with the killer and finding the killer, that she doesn't really leave room for anything else and is detached from everything else. She doesn't really care about her way back to a normal life. So I thought it was interesting that in this scene, she's literally dismantling the stairs that get her back out of this room. Now, obviously, yeah, they're just going to climb up some other way, but I thought it was very symbolic that she has no concern for how to get back up, to how to go back home, to how to go back to her normal life with her dad. Like, she's so in the deep end now that all she can see is the goal in front of her. She doesn't care about the way back. And I thought the idea of dismantling the stairs to actually get them back out of this basement was a very lovely little symbolic visual of that. Speaking of visuals, when she does get back up and she goes outside, the shot is stunning. When she comes out of the house and it's like sort of early morning, so that the sun's kind of low in the sky, and it's this low angle and this kind of basically like a suburban desert street. I don't know if like that's what you call this, but it's something that I only ever see in movies because it's only certain parts of the US. Well, I'm sure maybe there's other countries that have this too, but it's like a suburban street, but there's like nothing behind the houses. It's just desert. So it's got this really. It makes me think of like whenever there's like families in like the military, like the Air Force, and they'll be near like a test site or something. There'll be like a little suburban area for all the families to live, but there's not really anything else near it. That's what it was kind of giving me vibes of. But Darby goes over to a neighbor and asks to use a phone and tries to explain that there's been murders or whatever. And this old woman is just like, no, like that place is vacant. That's so and so's old place. And what I thought was really interesting, a really nice touch here, is that this woman's she's not being difficult, right? And this never comes across as her. It doesn't feel like she's being disingenuous or anything like that. It just feels like she just doesn't believe what's happening here. She's not really sinking in. But it's when Darby says they found the wife, right? Patricia, where this woman's tune, her facial expression, her demeanor completely changes. And Darby asks for the phone, and she yells at her husband to go get the phone, and she holds the phone up to her ear. She's dialed 911, and she doesn't say anything before the sentence. The first thing she says on the phone to 911, which is not helpful at all to anyone, is they found Patty. And I thought what was so good about this little moment, and Darby obviously takes the phone quite quickly because she has to get the important information. Here's the address. Here's what we believe's happened. And I love that Darby even talks kind of like a almost like she's in the police, or she's worked as a an operator for this before, where she's like, there's been and he committed suicide on the premises. Like, she says it very kind of proper and official, the way a law enforcement officer might say it, or a lawyer even, or something, right? And she gets the key information across. She's sort of keeping her cool head about it. But this woman just holds the phone up to her ear and says, "They found Patty." And I thought it was such a beautiful little thing to sell the idea that this woman couldn't believe that any wrongdoing happened, that anything went on over in this house. But as soon as the woman that she had been led to believe had just ran away or fled town, as soon as Darby says, "We found her, we found what we think is her body," this woman, like, the emotion and the reality of it hits her, and the idea that she's too in shock to give a proper statement to the operator on 911. She just says, "They found Patty." It really sells how much it's hitting her in the human part of this, and the idea that this went unnoticed. This woman did go forgotten until Darby went out of her way to look into this, to go find her, to track down the killer, to get justice for these people who were hurt. This is someone else who's been, like, immediately affected by the fact that Darby's done this, that has solved this crime for people who cared about her. This woman clearly cared about her neighbor. She was clearly friends with her, or at the very least gave a shit. Like, like, there's something there to that, and I think it's a really simple little choice in the scene to sell that, and it really, really works. Much like when they talk to the victim who survived, this felt like it added so much weight to what they were doing very, very efficiently and very quickly. And I can't really compliment it enough for that. I thought that was really good stuff. And again, the idea that Darby's almost a little detached from the human part of it, because she is able to just give the key details that need to be given to the operator. Very good stuff. Ta-da! I magically teleported and switched clothes. No, this is hours later. I got interrupted doing the review. But the big scene that came next that was really exciting to get to was the scene with Darby and Bill and what is going to lead to him leaving. Obviously, the seeds have already been planted, but this scene where they're both in the bathtub, he invites her in, and it's this very intimate scene because they're both completely naked, which typically means they feel vulnerable, and they're completely open here. And Bill certainly is. Bill is being very open. He wants to emotionally connect over what they've just been through, what they've just survived. He even, like, starts wiping her back. He starts scrubbing her back, and it's almost like a symbolic thing of him trying to kind of help with the trauma that he thinks she's also went through. But it all kind of goes sour because she very quickly pulls away and then starts talking about the killer and starts theorizing more about how the killer was maybe paying attention to what they were doing on Reddit, and he was excited by someone appreciating his work. And Bill very quickly snipes that he was not appreciating anything. That's not what this was. And it really builds to this disconnect between them, where she is still thinking about the crimes, still thinking about the killer, and still trying to kind of analyze it and give it meaning, whereas he's trying to have a human moment and connect about how she feels about this, but she's not opening up in that sense. And I think this is what it really gets to, when the message of, it's both too much and not enough. It's too much in the sense that it's too much to take in, and there's so much to process, and all of this heavy stuff with catching a killer, but it's not enough, and that she's not giving him enough of an emotional connection. And that idea that Darby even repeats back when we get back to present day, which is that she'd already kind of left him, even if she hadn't realized it yet. And that's the tragedy of it, right? And I think the music in this scene, the performances are great. I think it's one of the best scenes of the whole show, is them in this bathtub. But the thing that I've not mentioned yet is some of the interesting terminology that's used here, which obviously is also a hint to the characters. But he calls the killer bad programming, and kind of talks about him like he's bad code, that he is part of this system, like a corrupt part of the system that has to sort of be kind of fed with people being killed every so often. And obviously, the big themes that we've been talking about throughout the whole show have been very much about technology and relying on technology and computers, and both the good and the bad that they can bring to the table, right? And ultimately how people using them is kind of the thing. And we've seen both them use the computers to solve the killings and find the killer and get to this end game and finally seek some sort of justice for all the people who were killed. But clearly here, there's also this idea that the killer was following this progress, using the same systems and computers, and enjoying, or maybe not enjoying is the right word, but certainly getting something out of people finally putting the pieces together, some kind of thrill for the killer itself. So I think the idea of, talking about this trusting of technology, but then shifting it here in this conversation, because I don't think we've done too much of this. We've maybe done a little bit of it throughout the show, but this idea of actually comparing humans to technology themselves, like, the idea of the we are the good or bad code or whatever. And I've been watching Person of Interest, so calling people bad code's something that's come up in that. So I'm my lines are blurring here in terms of my ideas, but that is a very interesting thing to me to be put into the mix now that we're getting sort of towards the end of the story, and especially given everything we got with Andy in this episode about how he is this almost all-seeing, corrupt, watchful eye. He is almost like a really bad computer system that's very tyrannical in the way he controls everything around him. Calling the killer bad programming or defective programming, whatever the exact phrase was, it almost goes back to me jokingly suggesting that that Ray, the AI, might be incriminated in something here. It wouldn't shock me, I suppose, if that is the case. But that terminology being thrown out there in the middle of this conversation fits into their story and fits into what they've been talking about, and as does, of course, him destroying his laptop and his phone when he leaves them in the water, because again, he was talking about sort of like disconnecting from that, and the idea that he was opposing the Lumet who's building the smart cities because he doesn't like the idea of how much tracking they do, right? Yeah, Oliver explains that in the episode about how smart cities aren't just about, turning the lights on and off automatically and stuff like that. It's more about completely being aware of where everyone is and keeping tabs on everyone, much like this building. And one of the big reasons why Lee, of course, wants to get away is that once it's all finished, she feels like her and her son are going to be trapped in this bunker underground forever, and that the husband will never want to let them leave. So, and she's obviously sticking around, or she has stuck around till now, because Andy said, yeah, you can go, but you're not taking my son with you. So, and she cares about her son, so that's obviously something she's not willing to do. Yeah, I thought the end of the flashback story here was very good. It had a couple really big prominent scenes, mainly the bathtub scene. I thought the scene with the neighbor was also very, very well done and said a lot about how the humans in the story mattered. It was it meant nothing to this woman, or she didn't get the gravitas of what Darby was saying until she realized someone that she was neighbors with, possibly friends with, and realized that she had been a victim of something like this, and that completely altered how she was perceiving the moment. And I thought that added a lot of weight to like this as well, at this point in the story. And I think likewise, like when we cut back to the present day and Darby's like crying because she's not really said any of this out loud since she wrote it, and they're saying how it's healthy that she's sort of letting this out, and they have to sort of like, you have to deal with these things. You can't just bottle them up. And yeah, so the end of the episode is, of course, Andy finding them and very, very ominously saying, "There's my wife," in a really sort of threatening or foreboding way, and that's where the episode ends. Notably, this was the shortest episode by far. This was only like 45 minutes. I remember OA Season 1 being kind of like that, where there was like one episode right before the end that was only like 30 minutes. A lot of them had been like 60, 70 plus minutes, and then there was just one random one, well, not random, but like one right episode, but just before the last one was like 30 minutes. And it's just interesting from a structural point of view that that's kind of happened again here, where this one's so focused in a couple of key things, right? It basically boils down to two main things, which is Lee telling the story of trying to get away from Andy and setting up that stuff, and then the end of the flashback story. And I think given that both of them, the spotlight here made a lot of sense, and I enjoyed them quite a bit. Like, I was not down in the last couple episodes, but I do think episodes 4 and 5 suffered the most from the present day investigation stuff not being that interesting. Mainly just because it was all about just who we're accusing now. Here it felt like we were getting to more of the meat again, but it was so tied up in the human emotions and like the idea of telling these stories that this episode I thought was all of the show's strengths playing out. Although amusingly probably had the least amount of technology stuff with the themes. I know we had the stuff with Bill comparing the killer to technology, but the themes have obviously been explored a lot more in some of the other episodes, and I do love that stuff in the show. It's one of my favorite things. But I think the great directed human moments were abundant in this one and really set me up for the finale. I'm excited to see like if there is another swerve coming. It feels like, you know, there's a couple of other characters that are around. Like Lou May was talked about here. Is the director character going to factor into anything a bit more in the final episode? I do appreciate that some of them got their time to shine, where obviously we had Oliver this episode. We had Sean got a bit of a spotlight before her death for an episode. And admittedly, yeah, that wasn't my favorite episode. It was probably my least favorite of the whole show. But I do appreciate that it's kind of cycled through some of these other characters and made them feel like they've had their important moments throughout the story. So I'm very curious to see if the ones that haven't had much of a spotlight get a bit of time in the finale. So, no, I'm excited to see how it wraps up. Not so much like I'm interested in where it goes, but I'm not necessarily like sitting here tantalized by the thought of how the story's going to end. I'm just more excited about how the thematic stuff's going to sort of like be a part of the conclusion, and how, what it's going to ultimately maybe be saying about some of these ideas, and maybe the closure that Darby's going to get about Bill finally, I think is potentially quite exciting to me. That's what's saying to me more than anything else. So yeah, a bit of a weird review because I recorded it in two halves, so hopefully that wasn't too disjointed. I remembered what I had left to talk about though, so hopefully that was still pretty smooth sailing. But let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments, and of course you can hit the like button if you enjoyed it. It helps out a bunch. More people will find the channel. Check out other reviews that are on the channel, and of course if you want to support all the content, you can do that by going to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting and getting some bonuses for your trouble. But that is me. Thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?